Coogs house, the Houston Cougars knock off Notre Dame 66-56 in the third day of the Players Era Invitational, which begs the question, are the 7-1 Cougars better than they were at this point a year ago?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, today the podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day, last listen of the evening, first listen on Turkey Day, for tuning in the day after, whatever the case may be. And most of all, thank you for making Locked On Cougs and Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. If you have something to say and you just don't want to get involved, but you don't know how to say it, tell us in the comments down below as I stumble over my words there what you're thankful for in a Houston Cougar kind of sense or bigger this holiday season. Day show is brought to you by everybody over at FanDuel. Much to be thankful for over there as well. We'll talk to you more about that in just 1 second. We'll put down $5 if the bet hits. Get $300 back in bonus bets if it's your first one. I got to talk today, though, about Notre Dame in the first segment here and the win that was. I want to talk some about the program. I want to talk about the Players Era Invitational. I want to talk about what comes next for this basketball program. And we have a lot to get into. Full disclosure, this is live. This might go longer than the normal 28 to 32 minutes. We'll see where things go. Thank you for bearing with me, though. We didn't go live in the post-game holiday chaos. Didn't get to it right after the game because I wanted to make sure I had completely digested the game as opposed to watching on my phone or whatever, right? And so we're going to sit here and dive into this a little bit together. Houston does win, and I think that's obviously one of the biggest things to take away. It was Houston's third game in less than 48 hours. They played at 5 o'clock Central Time on Monday, 5 o'clock Central Time on Tuesday, and this game on Wednesday wrapped up at about 4:30 Central Time as well. I'm not great at math, but that is just shy of 48 hours after the first tip-off, and that clearly played a factor in this for both teams. Notre Dame also played 2 games the days prior. I would point out that their blowout over Rutgers meant that no one had to play as many minutes, and Houston had tougher opponents. That's a Players Era comment I think we'll talk about more later. But Houston looked like it, and I thought that was interesting here is the stretch earlier where Houston built up a 22-point lead in this game. Looked like Houston came out angry after last night. Angry they weren't playing for more cash in the NIL aspect of this tournament. Angry that they, got embarrassed a little bit. People did not think they were going to lose that game, and they did. People were comparing this team to last year's team because last year's team blew out Tennessee in the Elite Eight and all those things, and this team looked angry and determined. And frankly, I think it also looked like it ran out of gas in the second half, and that lead shrunk down to just 4 points. Houston led wire to wire, so it's not like it mattered a whole lot, but I do think that was interesting. I thought it was great to see Emanuel Sharp get into his back into his rhythm. He had 17 points in this one, but he had 17 points while also getting to the free throw line for 4 free throws when it was kind of do or die time late. He was ready to throw his body at the rim. I thought Milos Uzan similarly had 15 points that were fairly well timed as well. Houston was able to do a lot of things in this one. I think the fascinating thing for me as a fan of this program for a long time, 34 years old, for a long time at this point, right, is that you saw Mercy Miller and Ramon Walker really chip in a big kind of way off the bench in ways that we haven't seen them, at least not in quite some time. First of all, I would point out both that they did chime into this one. Ramon played 24 minutes, which has not happened in years, it feels like, in a game was decided by 10 points or less. Mercy Miller had 14 minutes as well. That's a lot of minutes for those two guys, given the state of the program right now. And they both also did things that I don't think they are necessarily connected to as far as like word association very often. Mercy Miller came in and had a couple great defensive plays and a couple big rebounds. This dude that was a 4-star recruit because he did things like score 60 in a high school game, right? He came in and did very, Houston Cougar kind of things that were a little bit different. I was like, try and shake this cough still. It's been a month. The cough's been a month. I've been trying to shake that. Ramon Walker, who was known for those hustle play kind of things, though, comes in and gets his own 9 points, including a 3. And really, I thought had an impactful day scoring, made them come cover him in a way that is, unique and new and different. Houston also played Khalifa Sacco for 10 big second half minutes and we're not playing him in the first. When they didn't play him in the first, I was worried there was too short a turnaround and he was not actually going to be able to play in this one because we know he's been working through different ailments and whatever in the offseason. He did get out there and got his own 10 minutes in the second half and played pretty big in those minutes. But I still think the biggest pluses in this game to me offensively, I mean, obviously the win is the biggest plus, but that Houston was able to come away with the win while attacking the rim, and they drew 19 fouls and shot 23 free throws. And after the complaint the night before was too many jump shots, they clearly took some of that to heart, it felt like, and attacked the cup. Now, that did lead to this not being Kingston Fleming's best outing. As far as the lows of this game go, Kingston Fleming's had just a point coming off of an NBA caliber night with 25 last night. He had 5 assists. He had 5 rebounds. He had a steal. I don't believe he had any turnovers on my docket here. Kingston had other aspects of his game, but having 25 last night and trying to will Houston back into that, he was unable to put the ball in the basket a whole lot on Wednesday. Similarly, on the low side of things, his freshman teammate, Chris Sinek, is still finding ways that he's going to contribute scoring. He's had games like the Auburn game where he had 18 points. He's had games like this one where he had just 4 points in 5 minutes. I still feel like the biggest thing is he's got too many moves he's good at and nothing he falls back on. And that's really a good problem to have, right? Too many things you're good at, just can't pick one. I made the reference earlier in the week that it's like you have $1 as a buck, right? But he has 100 pennies. And I just need 4 corners going to the slot machine here, dude. I just need 4 big, useful things. And I think we're still figuring that out for him. I think he's still figuring out. He's a true freshman, right? There's part of it is growing up and growing through that. And having all those 100 pennies is what makes him so talented, makes him a top 10 pick. Reeling it back down to what's going to work for him. But when you pair that with JoJo Tugler having he had 10 points, and frankly, he got his first foul late in the first half, and things looked like they were turning around for him. He had a block, had a steal, had 8 rebounds total, but he found a way to still foul out in this game. And while his last foul might be bogus, that's still a foul out. And Houston needs him on the floor. And between him taking himself out of the game in that way and Sinek having trouble finding ways to score, Houston did feel like they needed some low post scoring presence. And did Ramon Walker come in and give you 9 points that you didn't expect? Yeah. Did that help? Absolutely. Khalifa Sacco came in though for 10 minutes. He got you 6 in 10 second half minutes, right? And so Houston's trying to find ways to find that easy bucket down low, because right now Houston is still looking at they're in a spot where they're trying to figure out what their go-to move is, right? A year ago became finding Jawan Roberts in the low post for left hook, or LJ Cryer at the top of the key to go side to side and find something for 3, right? Year prior to that, it was Jamal Shed. Let's all space out. Y'all be ready to shoot. I'm going downhill. This team is still looking, and it is just November 26th as we're time recording. This team is still looking for what that option is for them. And I think that's okay. But I do think they came in the year thinking they'd get more out of their low post actions down low. And so I think that ultimately that's just something they're going to continue to figure out what direction they're going with here. Now, I got other things I want to look at in the program in the second segment. I want to figure out kind of where we sit as we hit Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving last year felt like the world was falling apart. The sky was falling for the program. And then they made it all the way to the national championship game and were a player or 2 away from winning a national title. Before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by our buddies, as I mentioned, over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the NBA is back. College basketball is back in action. College football is in rivalry week. Bowls are soon. Playoffs are soon. NFL playoffs are getting pretty close these days. Everything is in, and action is happening over at FanDuel. Even if you miss the start of a game or want to ride a hot hand, FanDuel has live bets, everything from who will score next to big fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at bigger payouts. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making a late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up and play your game with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. And I want to talk about the program where it's sitting, as Houston is 7-1 right now. And a year ago, they were sitting here at 4-3. And I don't think the biggest difference, they played one more game. I think there's other differences in the program this year versus a year ago. And I would point out that a big, interesting piece of that is not just, I'm not going to go drag out every single comment or every single article, every single worrisome person from a year ago. Houston left Las Vegas last year, and people were saying this team misses Jamal Shedd. Jamal Shedd had done everything for this team. He was Big 12 Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, was in the running for Naismith Player of the Year. They looked at that team with Jamal Shedd like he was the engine, he was the culture, he was the heartbeat. You can't replace any of that. What are you going to do? All this. You bring this transfer Milos Uzan. He's just not the same guy. Blah blah blah. And that team went from 4-3 on a pretty crazy run, mathematically speaking, to get to 35-5, and that's counting a one possession loss in the national championship game. And frankly, the other loss was also a single point in overtime to a Texas Tech team that blew a lead in the Elite Eight game, right? So like good basketball team there too. And Houston at this point actually feels better and more safe and more sound in what they're doing. And I don't mean to say that it's the exact same progression. You also won a couple games last year that were nail biters, close one possession games that, Malik Wilson missed the shot against Kansas. That one's probably lost, right? I mean, that one actually would have been a loss, whatever, right? As you look at what Houston's building here, though, I think that a couple truths on the program right now. Yes, if you have fresh legs in this Notre Dame game, you probably make more of a statement win in it. The Notre Dame podcasts out there probably also telling you that, frankly, if you didn't have those 2 games in 2 days prior to this, Notre Dame probably never gets in the big 22-point deficit, but sure, right? I think that this team would have had a statement win there. And frankly, had they not played Syracuse the night before Tennessee, they probably also beat Tennessee, but that's neither here nor there, right? I also think that when looking at problems with this team, JoJo Tugler needs to be on the floor a lot more, and he will never be a guy that has 0 fouls. But I don't want to say this. Having dumb fouls makes the inevitable hustle fouls bigger deals. They put them under a magnifying glass. And getting the dumb fouls are dumb, but they get compounded when you get a hustle foul for his 5th foul at the end of the game, when if that had been his 3rd foul, because he didn't have 2 dumb ones earlier, it's just, shucks. And you just keep going. Right. And so those are the kinds of moments where it's like we anticipated a junior JoJo Tugler to have grown through this. The guy's Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year last year. And Frank was in the running for National Defensive Player of the Year. Was a preseason, nominee or whatever for National Defensive Player of the Year this year. He's got to be on the floor to do all those things. If he's on the floor doing those things, this team is really tough to beat because he is that kind of a defender, right? I also think that we're finding out what his evolving offensive game, which is more than it was when he got here, but maybe not where he thinks it is. And maybe some of that has to do with the fact that he spent a big chunk of the offseason in a boot, right? And so he's still working his way back from that and figuring out what he is and is doing. It is interesting to see what that option goes to, because between he and Sinek, I still maintain he's going to have this figured out before February. I don't think it has to take that long. We saw him have it figured out against Auburn when Houston needed it. And he's had against some of the patsies as well. Obviously, it's a little bit different deal. He's a rebounding machine, right? Even today, while we're dogging him, Chris Sinek did have a couple rebounds in his time, and he really wasn't on the floor all that long, right? But I look at that post group, Sinek, Tugler, Saka off the bench. Sedlot played some minutes in the first half today, which also makes me indicate that maybe they weren't planning on playing Saka until they had to. Ramon and Chase as small ball fours. Chase only played 3 minutes today, which is interesting. I look at that group, though, and I say, okay, someone in that group has to be able to score in the post when Houston needs it. And that's just kind of been a calling card. Is that going to be Sinek in a mid-post ISO? Is that going to be Tugler in a right hook? Whatever the case may be, they got to clean that up, because I do think that's something that they're thinking they're going to need as an option for a go-to bucket later, right? That all being said, they're definitionally better, not just because they're 7-1 versus 4-3. I think they're in a lot better spot than they were a year ago, right? A year ago, they were missing, it felt like so much more with Jamal Shed gone, that when you look at the team this year, yes, you lose leading scorer LJ Cryer. Yes, you lose culture heartbeat guy Jawan Roberts. But it feels like this team is much more in sync, even with missing two starters, right? Versus a year ago, losing one starter felt like the whole world was falling apart. Because the way the ball is moving, you're getting more assists. And part of that, I think, is because you're playing 2 point guards for so much of the game, right? But this team feels like a team that is finding more of those answers early. And frankly, they're finding them in wins, I think, importantly. They're, you know, playing a not their best game against Auburn, but finding a way to win. Playing not their best game against Syracuse, but finding a way to win. Playing not their best game against Notre Dame today and finding a way to win. That is improvement based on this point of the season a year ago, right? I'm not saying that they're going to go, 37-3 because a year ago they only lost 2 games after Thanksgiving. The entire season. But I do think that this is an indication this is another strong setup team for the year. I'd also point out that the Big 12 was even more of a gauntlet than it was a year ago. And so you might actually have the same amount of losses with more of them coming after Thanksgiving and having had a better team. It's just a tougher test, so to speak. I think also, though, that we're finding out that Kingston's going to be the engine to a lot of this after this weekend, after this week, I should say. It's weekend because they're just like not working school in the same way because it's Thanksgiving week. But Kingston's kind of becoming the straw that stirs the drink. He didn't have a great day against Notre Dame and still won, so maybe that's out the window. But he has led the team in scoring in 5 of their 8 games so far. And frankly, it felt like when there was a moment there that Houston might come back and beat Tennessee after losing the lead late, it felt like it was going to be on Kingston Fleming's shoulders, right? Like he's kind of got that aura to him when he gets things going. He also, for what it's worth, when he is moving at full speed, is the fastest player. It feels like in America, a Derrick Rose type of athleticism. I keep reminding folks and talking about with folks, right? I also think that, interestingly enough, rotation guys like 6-9, while it's kind of hard to tell which one is in which slot, so to speak, it feels like they're more comfortable with them on the floor, guys 6-9, at this point than they were a year ago. And that's Isaiah Harwell. That's, it had been a little bit of Mercy Miller in the first half of previous games, Khalifa Saka going off the bench in some games. But Ramon Walker gave you 24 minutes in this one, right? Like they're finding lots of guys. They played, that doesn't even feel, they played 12 guys in this basketball game. KJ got a minute, so we'll call it 11 guys that played more than a minute. But that's kind of crazy to think about conceptually, right? That's where the team is and the program is. That was not the way we felt about this team a year ago. A year ago was like, do we have 5? And now we're like, okay, what's the order of 6-9? I do think that this team is going to need Chase McCarty to play more minutes over the course of the season. I don't think that's a ton of minutes. I just think he needs to give you some positional flexibility in playing a stretch 4. I think we're finding how valuable Khalifa Sacco is and the presence he is, especially with JoJo Tugler's foul trouble early in the season. I also think we're seeing that JoJo Tugler's going to find ways to stay on the floor, right? Like, I think those are all real questions about this team. But the truth is, this point in the season last year, you still, by Thanksgiving, did not have a go-to reliable, let's stop the bleeding and get a bucket kind of an answer. And this year, while we're questioning what that is, I do feel like there are options. Whereas last year, I was really questioning what that was. We were wondering if LJ Cryer could play with the ball in his hands more because he didn't have Jamal Shed feeding it to him. We figured that out, right? We were wondering if Jawan Roberts was a one-trick pony, and it turned out that didn't always matter, right? Like those things sorted themselves out a lot of the ways last year. Program's in a different spot this year and feeling pretty good about a lot of things. I feel good about the program and the spot it's in this year. Now, do I wish they'd beaten Tennessee and played for a lot of money? Sure. But one of my issues with the Players Era Invitational actually is that had they beaten Tennessee, they actually still might not have been playing for a lot of money. And that's weird to say. But we'll talk about it in 1 second. But first, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Omaha Steaks, because the holidays always make, everyone worried about food, and it feels a little bit easier when you already have the perfect gift. Put those two things together. Omaha Steaks makes it almost too simple. Treating yourself this season, sending something memorable to family, friends. Omaha Steaks can deliver handcrafted perfection right to their door. This week is the best time to jump in because their cyber sale is here and the deals are huge. The quality is exactly what you hope for. Incredibly tender, juicy, rich flavor. Makes hosting that weekend cookout for the game or whatever that much easier. Save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. You heard that right. 50% off site-wide and extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. For initial $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. It's college, COLLEGE. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Turn to apply. See site for details. Parker Rangers locked on Coogs here, and Players Era Invitational has gotten a lot of, should we say, flack. People have problems with Players Era Invitational, and I'm here to tell you that is not going away, and it is definitely not going away for Houston. The directors of the tournament were praising Sampson. There's an agreement between the Big 12 and the Players Era Invitational that the top 8 teams in the 16-team Big 12 will have automatic invites to the Players Era Invitational should they want them next year, and that's going to keep rolling. This is not going away. Houston will always be involved, and for what it's worth, Sampson said before it started that when they heard about a Thanksgiving week tournament that led to NIL money, they had to sign up for it. They told administration not to even worry. If the checks don't clear, worry about it later. We're not in any different a place than if we'd gone to a tournament that didn't pay the guys. We got to go sign up for this, right? And I think it's interesting because it drew so much backlash from nostalgic folks this week. Look, it is not in Maui. It is not that tournament. The Maui Invitational had a 40-year run. 1984 was the first Maui Invitational. And it was this premier tournament that Houston had played in a couple times, right? Especially the COVID year when it was actually not in Maui. But Houston played in a couple times. And it was a big deal. And Vegas has the Players Era Invitational has kind of come to take its lunch money. And I think that's fine. I think a lot of the nostalgia for Maui is actually kind of wrapped in some of the wrong stuff. You want places people want to go. It's people want to go to Las Vegas. That's a very normal place to visit. It's got a gigantic tourism economy, right? That's normal. But also, it's not like it was easy to get to Maui. That's a lot of flying. It's a long flight. And then if you go to you don't necessarily always land in Maui and go to Hawaii, so you got to jump over once you're there. That ain't easy either, right? I also would point out that as far as getting to Maui goes, that if you're not a West Coast team, you got to go across country before you even get there. Vegas is every airport in America is trying to fly to Vegas because people want to go to Vegas, right? I think that the idea that this is not Maui because the location is just a little bit bogus. That's just people that are nostalgic for Maui and the Maui Invitational and the old way things happen, right? I will say one criticism of the Players Era Invitational that I think is extremely valid is that Houston wrapped up their game Tuesday night, had to wait till almost midnight Central Time. So what is that? 10 p.m. local time to find out they played the next day, a little over 12 hours later, right? There's no bracket. There's no telling who you're going to play, anything like that. Now, for folks wondering why that is, they seed things based on you play 2 games against randomized opponents that you don't play otherwise in your schedule, meaning not in the same conference or whatever, right? And then they seed it 1 versus 2, 3 versus 4, etc., based on point differential and record first, I should say, then point differential. And they still try to get non-conference opponents to be playing each other in that second day slate. Well, that leads to someone like Iowa State winning both of their games and then playing ultimately for 5th place, which is ludicrous, but the way it worked out for Iowa State. Or Houston plays 2 really challenging games and a good Syracuse team and a really good Tennessee team. Notre Dame had Rutgers yesterday. right? Like no shots fired at Rutgers. Okay, a little bit of shots fired at Rutgers, but like not the same thing. You had schools that played mid-majors for both their games, right? It's just different. And I think all that's to say that the naturally, if you are actually playing the best competition there, and you might be in the running for the best team there, and you beat two, that if you beat teams 2 and 3, and you're the best team there, the margin of victory in your first 2 games will likely be low, thus making it impossible to make the actual championship game in the current format, because the team that went 2-0 and beat some cream puffs won by 20 each game. They got a 40-point differential. To match, you beat number 2 and 3 team in America by 2 and 4 points respectively. The differential is 34 points. They beat you there, right? And I do think that's got to be some way to fix that and some way to orchestrate that. This feels very AAU, and it's not like Peach Jam AAU. This feels very random weekend in June at the nearby high school AAU kind of circuit, right? And I'm not sure what the immediate fix is. I'm also not the person in charge of fixing it, though. I do think they've got to find a way to fix this and get that kind of thing set up correctly in a way that makes some sense and is predictable, not just for you and I to sit around and talk about who Houston's going to play, but probably more importantly, so like the team's not playing a team they don't know about until 12 hours later and playing 3 times in less than 48 hours and doing that, right? You got to space that out a little bit and make that smarter. And maybe that does mean you take more than 3 or 4 days to do this. Maybe it makes it a full week kind of thing. Okay. Oh, a week of college basketball. Oh man, that's tough. That's figure out that you can figure that out, right? I also wonder how you could evenly make into like pods where like, Houston, like I said, played Tennessee and Syracuse. Other schools got a pair of mid majors. How do you even that out maybe and have like some like every pod has the preseason AP poll ranking is like the same number or something, right? If you add the digits, like finding some way to make those all more relatively similar divisions, because I'd argue Houston was certainly not I think they came in 9th or whatever. I think they're clearly better than 9th best team there. They just ran into a good Tennessee team that had a different day the day before and was just a little bit less tired. And anyway, I don't want to sound like the excuse maker. I should really stop talking about it from a Houston centric point of view. The tournament having it where teams can go 2-0 and not make it to the final, even though they went 2-0 against good teams and had close wins over good teams, is backwards. When teams can win this tournament by going 2-0 and beating the brakes off of bad teams. Like when Noah here asked about me thinking about Houston versus Michigan had a much easier tournament than Houston did. That's the way that worked out, right? Now, I do think, though, that those are things that this is just, an early on in its history type of tournament. You'll see Houston figure out over the course of time. And I see Houston. You'll see the Players Invitational figure out over time. People forget that like that Maui thing took decades. We think about the Maui as like the 2000s and the nostalgia and the late 90s. But there was a whole bunch of Maui Invitational in the 80s where people were like, why am I going to Hawaii for this basketball tournament? There's so many basketball teams to play here. Look, I get the location being an issue to some people. The only thing you'll sell me on that makes it worth it if you're not going to this is playing these games in like college campuses, right? If you can find some sort of like way to have, Houston hosts and then has a neutral site, like to where you have college campuses involved for the fans' sake, I could see that being a better option. But if you're going to go to a gigantic non-college town neutral site anyway, I'm sorry. I don't care that Maui had it for 40 years and now Las Vegas does. I don't care that Charleston had it for 30 years and now Las Vegas does. That's the way capitalism works. I don't know what to tell you. They make a better product. And further, in all of those tournaments that were built up over decades, this is probably the final point on the Players Era. Millions and millions of dollars were put into those tournaments and millions of dollars were revenued in those tournaments every year because of the buildup. And now we've got a tournament that's finding ways to get those dollars through whatever weird scaling they're doing and whatever problems we have with how they're doing. They're putting those dollars into the pocket of the players playing. You're never going to get me to say that's the wrong thing to do. Sorry. Like, you're just not. Those are the guys that are putting together the product that we are enjoying. The money should go to them, not some venue. Right? Like end of day, not some hosting committee. It should go to the players. And that this is giving them that NIL split is significant. And it means it works, and it means it's going to last for a long time. Now, I do want to take a couple of these questions and talk some about really kind of like Houston going into FSU, and I haven't seen a whole lot about Florida State and all that, but a couple of things here about freshmen and stuff like that. So we are going to sign off. I want to answer these questions after the closing, whatever. But today's show is brought to you again by everybody's over at FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, Locked On Cougs, primarily Locked On Podcast, number one sports podcast network in the world. Go Cougs. Stay tuned for answering the questions. All right, we're back. We got a handful of questions here. We go through this. Aldridge asks, what do you think they do over the next week plus that they have off? So Houston does not play, if you're paying attention to your calendar, until December 6th when they host Florida State in the Toyota Center. And Florida State is not the Scotty Barnes era Florida State, but they're pretty good for the ACC. And I think, frankly, what you're going to have is they probably get Turkey Day off, probably get Friday off. I imagine they have a couple really hard days. And I imagine that's hard days in terms of breaking down film and being brutally honest. I imagine that's hard days in terms of working. I imagine that's hard days in terms of physicality. And I imagine those days feel more like getting ready for preseason kind of stuff. I don't talk about who I talk to or whatever a whole lot because I want to, be protective of sources. But I do think that had there been days between games in this Players Era Invitational, you'd had some brutal conversations in film rooms about some of the stuff happening on the floor because while Houston went 2-1 and Houston is 7-1 overall, and Houston's done some really good things, we also see some areas where this team does not feel like they're playing the best version of Houston Cougar basketball either, right? So I think the first half, the very first part is going to be take a rest, get your legs right. Then it's going to be work. And then about Wednesday, Thursday, I kind of see it down more into game time action. I think that's where I see this thing going most. I feel like in my heart of hearts, though, that's good. I like that. Unlike last year, you have two more big time, air quotes, or Power Four opponents in Florida State and Arkansas in the non-conference. And you get time between now and then, now and Florida State certainly to start to kind of get things ready. And then you have about 2 weeks between Florida State and Arkansas, which you do play games in the window there. It's not that you don't play anyone or anything like that, but you're kind of gearing up for Arkansas for another big test before jumping into Big 12 play. Because Big 12 play this year is going to be crazy. Like, Big 12 is so freaking good right now. It's crazy. That Kansas looked that good without Darren Peters on the floor is nuts. Other things to see here. Scared to lie on freshmen, says Crabtree 77. Vet's got to carry a thing, but the tablet is there. I'm not sure the consistent talent is there. Not sure the consistency is. I get that, and I'm not saying this team has the Fab Five, and I'm not saying all of that. I do think, though, that between both being a guy I've enjoyed talking to, he had an episode where he came on and did an interview, so I can openly say that I talked to Kingston at least a little bit there, right? Between everything you see about him, everything you read, like, that cat's different, man. Like, not every freshman can lead, and that cat is not every freshman. Chris Sinak feels more like every one and done freshman in that he is extremely talented, and it's just like, oh, you're so close putting it together, right? Kingston ain't that. Kingston is different. Chris feels a lot like Jarris, where like he played 15 minutes against Notre Dame because honestly they were like 15 minutes of him playing and making mistakes, and Samson's like, I can't watch this crap anymore, and he took him out for stretches, right? Like, we saw Sampson pull. How many times was it? It had to be double-digit games where Sampson pulled Jarris for a 7-minute stretch exclusively for fouling a jump shooter. He was so sick and tired of watching Jarris do that all the time. I feel very similar watching him coach Chris, and I think they're very similar talents in that they're gigantic people that play on the perimeter, both Chris and Jarris Walker. I think the difference being that Chris Sinak is probably a little bit more skilled and fluid, where Jarris Walker was even more athletic. I mean, Jarris was a freak. I mean, just he maximized gifts in every way possible, right? I say it all to say that I get what you're saying about freshmen generally, but this Kingston kid feels a little bit different to me. And I also think that he's playing co-point guard with Milos in a way that's really cool to see grow. And I think Milos and Emanuel being there as kind of tethers for him is important. And so I don't know that I have the same kind of worry here that E.I. Crabtree does, but I get the concern, generally speaking, just not where I'm at. Reginald is on the same page. A lot of us were 3 teams, 3 days good because we have work off or whatever. I get that. TK comes in down here with saying he's likely seeing Miller and McCarty thus far. Clearly, the room to improve. I really and sincerely, I couldn't quite get through every game he played in my head last year because Mercy didn't get into every game last year. There's a lot of me that I feel like that was the best game Mercy Miller's ever played for Houston anyway. He only had 4 points, and he is a scorer, and he had more than 10 and once or twice last year, I want to say. He played an important 14 minutes in a game that was not decided while he was in it, or before he came into it, I should say. He had 4 rebounds that were each felt crucial. I could remember 3 of them, and so I assumed he had more 6. He had 4 crucial rebounds, including one offensive rebound, extended a possession that kind of felt like that Houston got an extended possession, kind of iced the game in of itself. I think Mercy played extremely well today. I do think that Chase has had moments that felt similar. Chase is a redshirt freshman, though, and I think he's at times still learning the speed of Houston's defensive coverage. And it's fascinating when you talk to someone about their coverages. They have multiple ways to play the pick and roll, and in their scouting report, they'll see each player in the other team and their tendencies. And so therefore they'll be in different coverages based on what player has the ball, based on what player has the ball where on the floor, based on what player has the ball screening, and what defenders are involved. And in a handful of words back and forth, Houston is communicating based on all those things, which coverage they're into, and that changes the backside rotation. That changes who tags the roller, all of those different steps, right? And it is extremely complicated flying at high speed. And I don't want to give away exactly what they're doing all the time. And frankly, I also don't understand it all myself. It's extremely complicated. But I do think that high level of defensive basketball IQ, it's one thing to have done it for a redshirt year last year. Chase McCarty's played 8 games. It takes a lot to learn, and I feel like we're seeing it. He's shown what he can do and help this team win. We're seeing it add up a lot more. Can Mercy Miller be Malik Wilson? Honestly, not a terrible comp. I think the other thing about Malik, though, that you got to remember is that guy was a veteran's veteran. He was a 6th year of college guy between some red shirts and stuff like that. Positionally, the way he adds the scoring and that kind of stuff, sure. Malik was a defense first guy. Mercy feels like an offensive first, even as good as he played today. I think he's still an offensive first guy. And so that makes me wonder if sorry, I got to turn the baby monitor down over here. Little guys at home. Little guys in the other room. I feel like that's the big difference to me, though, is that Malik came in and was really a defensive first guy that benefited playing off of Jamal and Milos on offense. I think that Mercy is an offensive guy that's benefiting from playing with JoJo and those guys defensively. And so we're seeing him grow into something different. I don't know what Cornholio sometimes chimes in with jokes, but he said something about seeing acting start lighting up off if he's going to dominate. I would love it to be Chris, that as far as the low post scorer, a go-to guy to get a bucket when you need it or whatever. I would love for that to be Chris. What I'm worried about a little bit is if it's not Chris, do you have an offensive guy in the front court? I think if you ask Sampson in his heart of hearts, he'd love for it to be a front court player. Bluntly, those shots sometimes feel more reliable because they're micing shots, they're close shots, they're post-up shots, right? I think that the difference being that we saw so much success with Jamal when he had it on the perimeter attacking the cup, that I wonder if we end up falling to a Kingston doing that kind of a thing, or a Milos doing that kind of thing as the more fallback. And I say that all to say that, the same way like I talk about offense with football and the Cougs, like you got to have a play to hang your hat on, and everything else stems off of that. When you're playing in these games like Houston against Notre Dame, I keep coughing too close to the mic, sorry. But you see the lead start to dwindle, and you see all of a sudden like that 22-point lead go to 11, go to 8, and it's okay. Stop the bleeding, get a bucket. Who's that going to be? That's when it feels like, we need to have something set up for Kingston, get an ISO and attack the rim, or a Chris Nack post up, or whatever. A year ago, that was we hit Jawan Roberts on the block. And if he was in foul trouble and not the game, it's went to LJ, right? And so I feel like if it ends up being Chris, I think what we're seeing is this team is figuring out who it is and still finding ways to be 7-1 while they figure that out. And that's a good thing. I think I hit most questions. There's some comments back and forth about my own internet. Sorry if that was not great. But thank you all for tuning in to the postgame show, even the latest version of the postgame show tonight. Locked on Cougs, the Locked On Podcast. I'm your team every day, the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Go Cougs.